Hey everyone, so today we are going to go ahead and cover Unit 8, Day 4, which is basically talking about the midpoint. How to find the midpoint between 2 points that we call the endpoints, okay? So if we look at example number 1, these two little points at the end of the line segment, those are known as endpoints. And basically, typically the directions will say, what is the midpoint of the line segment, or what is the midpoint between the two endpoints. Okay, so let's look at number one, and let me say, okay, let's say I'm asking you find the halfway point between these 2 points, or the halfway point of this line segment. Well, you can easily look at this problem or this graph and say, oh, the halfway point is right there, Mr. Gomez, which basically would be -3, -3, because it's an order pair. It's pretty easy if you're looking at it. But sometimes the midpoint is not going to be whole numbers. It could be something like 11 over 2 and 7 over 2. Or a little bit more complicated, 17 pi and 12 pi as an order pair. Or something as simple as 7.389 and 7.321. Okay? And it's not as easy to be able to look at it on the graph and say, oh, that's the midpoint. So we will use a formula, which is actually, it is a formula, but it's pretty straightforward and easy to understand because it's basically common sense. So the formula that we typically give students is, x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay, and I know you're looking at that, format and saying, I do not understand what that means. So what they're saying is, if you were to take your two endpoints and basically add the x's together and divide it by 2, take your y's, add them together and divide it by 2, you will get your midpoint. And if you think about midpoint, we're basically just taking the average of two numbers and cutting them in half, because finding the midpoint or the middle section is basically cutting it in half and finding the half section of whatever you're looking at. And in this case, we're talking about a line segment. So let's actually work this problem out using, this idea. We really don't need to know this formula because, like I said, it's common sense. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the mathematical way instead of just looking at it like we did on number one. And you might say, well, Mr. Gomez, why can't we do that on number two? Well, if you look at it, the midpoint or the halfway point will fall right here in between -2 and -1. So obviously it's going to be a decimal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down my two endpoints. The first one is -5, +5, okay? The next one is 2, -5. So there's my two endpoints. So basically this idea says that if we add our x's together and divide by 2, that is going to give me the x value of the midpoint. If I add them together, the y values, and divide by 2, that will give me the y value of the midpoint. So let's start off with the x's. And remember, the x's is the first number of each set of order pairs, okay? So -5 plus 2 is -3. And then we're going to divide by 2 because we have to cut it in half because we're finding the midpoint. Okay, now let's do the y values. 5 plus a -5 is 0, and divided by 2 because we're cutting it in half. And now, of course, let's simplify. So, -3/2 is basically what? -1.5? -1.5. And then 0 divided by 2 is just 0. There's my midpoint. And if you look at our graph, -1.5 and 0 is right there, which is the halfway point, which makes sense. Now you might say, well, I actually, how can we guarantee that? Okay, well, let's go back and let's do number one, and let's use this idea of adding the x's together and divide by 2, adding your y's together, divide by 2, and that'll give you the midpoint. So let's get my order pairs, or my endpoints. So my first endpoint is -5, -5. And then the other endpoint is -1, -1. Okay? So here we go. We add the x values together. So negative 5 plus negative 1 is negative 6. And don't forget to divide by 2 because we have to cut them in half. And then negative 5 plus negative 1 is negative 6 divided by 2. So yes, technically this is my midpoint, but let's simplify. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. And there you go. We got the same midpoint. One was just by looking at it. The other one is by doing the simple idea. Okay? So do I recommend just looking at it or graphing the 2 points, drawing your line? No. Do it this way. You use the mathematical way to be able to solve them. It's pretty straightforward to find the midpoint. Add your x values together, divide by 2. Add your y values together, divide by 2. Now, the only difference between how I set it up and how this, formula, or I guess concept is set up is that they go ahead and just put your two x's together in the parentheses, and then they put the two y's together and then divide, okay? I went ahead and just did basic addition, add the x's together, divide by 2. Add the, add the y's together, divide by 2. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, let's move on to number 1 on the next page. It says the endpoints of a line segment are located at negative 3, negative 4, and negative 15 and negative 20. What are the coordinates of the midpoint of the line segment? So let's draw a picture, okay? So here's my line segment. My first point is negative 3, negative 4. You don't always have to draw a picture, but I'm only going to do it for problem number 1 so you can see what we're doing. And then the other endpoint is negative 15, negative 20. Okay? They want me to find the midpoint. So obviously the midpoint is going to be right here. So according to our, idea of midpoint, we're going to add the x's together. Here we go. And divide by 2. Negative 3 plus negative 15 is negative 18. Don't forget to divide by 2. And then negative 4 plus negative 20 is negative 24. Okay? Divided by 2. So now let's simplify that. Negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. Negative 24 divided by 2 is negative 12. And there's your midpoint, which is answer choice B. Okay? Let's move on to number 2. What is the midpoint of the line segment with endpoints at that? So let's add them together. And then divide by 2, okay? 12 plus 8 is 20 divided by 2. 7 plus 3 is 10 divided by 2. Okay, and remember, we're dealing with ordered pairs, okay? So 20 divided by 2 gives you 10. And 10 divided by 2 gives you 5. So your answer is C. Okay, let's move on. Number 3. A straight pipeline mapped on a coordinate plane starts at 210 and ends at A2. A pump station is located halfway along the pipeline. What are the coordinates of the pump station? Okay, so here we go. We have this, I should use black. We have this pipeline. It starts at 210 and then it ends at A2. And they're telling me that I have this pump station, which is the midpoint. Okay? So let's do this. I'm going to add those two values. I think I'm at the point where I can just go ahead and add them and divide by 2 and not have to set it up like that, just so I can save some space, okay? So 2 plus 8, because we're adding the x's together, 2 plus 8 is 10 divided by 2. And then my y values, 10 plus 2 is 12 divided by 2. So now 10 divided by 2 is 5. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And there's my midpoint. 5, 6, which is answer choice A. Okay?